Okay, let's see what's going on inside my garage today. Now at first glance here, you might guess I'm doing body work on this car. But believe it or not, this is what you need to do to change the radiator on this car. But actually this part is not that big a deal. Taking off the grill, the headlights, and the bumper, it actually only takes a few minutes. And it's not hard to do, as long as you know what you're doing. And that's really not the worst part of the job. It just looks bad. But there's really no way around it. Some might try to get around this, but this will make your job easy, much easier to do. It's first thing you want to do before you change the radiator. Go ahead and remove the headlights, the grill. Well, in the order of you would take the grill out, then the headlights out. Actually, you take that back. First thing you take out the grill. Second, you take out the side marker lights in the fender, the cornering lamps, then the headlights, and then you take off the lower splash shields, because they're attached to the bumper as well. You disconnect your wires to the fog lights. There's also, if you look at this here, that plugs into a temperature sensor, an outside temperature sensor that's mounted in the front bumper as well. So you disconnect all that and remove the bumper. I'll go into that a little bit more within the video. Some more specifics on doing that, but it's really not that big a deal. And also this is the same work you'd need to do to get at this power steering line, this pressure line that runs from the pump to halfway to the rack. Runs right across the front of the car, and I'll explain that more, why I'm doing that at the same time. Now early on, when I first went to change my radiator, I removed the lower splash shield because this lower driver's side of the car for left-hand drive cars, left-hand steering cars, is where your drain plug is on the radiator. Plus you have to take those splash shields off to remove the bumper. And so anyways, when I took this shield off, first thing I noticed right up here, of course this is the new line, but I noticed right here where they like to rust out, power steering lines, because the moisture is held here, they will they tend to rust out there, and then you get a pressure leak from your power steering line. So as soon as I saw that it wasn't leaking yet, but as soon as I saw the amount of rust on it, I stopped what I was doing and ordered up a power steering line. Decided I would definitely do that at the same time I'm changing the radiator. It's just not worth changing the radiator and then taking all this stuff back apart to change this line later. I wanted to do it right. So anyways, well, let's talk about the bumper. There it is. Now, to take it off, let me just show you a few things. Because really it's the first thing you want to do, because when you work here, ultimately you're going to take the radiator out here between the engine and the cross member here. And it's not that easy to get it out of here, but this is where it's going to come out. But before you even start taking this stuff apart, just take the bumper off, because it enables you to stand closer to the car, makes it easier to work on. For one thing, you don't have to bend over as much. It's much more pleasant to not to have to bend over there with your knees against the bumper. So go ahead and take it off first thing. You're going to have to take it off anyways. And so let's talk about that first, taking off the bumper, and then we'll talk about what you've got to do under here to access the radiator. So got my parts organized here.
I've already taken them off, but the first thing is the grill sits here. There's this rectangle here. It sits on a clip that's actually on the headlights, and then this bottom just slots over a peg that's part of the headlights as well. So very first thing, this just pops right out. It's pretty self-explanatory. You squeeze the clips and pull it out. Now to get the headlights out, you take off the cornering lamp first. There's just a slotted, there's a Torx screw, again on the headlight, and you just loosen that up. You don't have to take it out. Loosen it up enough for the slot there, and then this has little feet. So basically you loosen it up, these slide forward and come right out, nothing to it. And then I found the easiest thing, don't unplug the bulbs, just take the sockets right out of there, and just take note of where they go. After doing that, you'll be ready to take out your headlamps. And yeah, these are pretty simple too. Here's your screw that was holding on the cornering lamp. You've got here another Torx, pulls the headlight on there. We got two on the top to take out here. Here's your clip for holding the grill on. Here's the peg for holding the grill on. So pretty simple. It's got a little foot on the bottom here that secures it, so once you take all your screws out, you pop it up a little and pull it out. Be careful. These are nice, actually. They're glass. They don't have that problem with the plastic flogging out for the newer cars. So now let's talk about the bumper. Basically, the bumper is held on with two long bolts that run through here. Before you take those out, a couple things you want to do. See the headlight wipers here? I found the easiest thing, because these will actually, there's a little slot in the bumper where these come through. Instead of messing with the arm or anything else, or scratching your paint, there's just two 10mm nuts on each of these headlight wipers. Just lay it in there. You don't have to unplug it or anything. There's a clip for your headlight washer line on each side that clips to the bumper, so you'll have to take that off. As mentioned before, temperature sensor, you have to get that from underneath when you take off the lower splash shields, which you have to do before you take off the bumper. The other thing that you'll need to do is in the wheel well here, there's a couple screws that attach to the bumper there, and then, as I mentioned, the lower splash shields. And there's a corner bolt here that you want to make sure you get this one out. It's a 10mm, and sometimes because the splash shields are cracked and that and everything, you might be able to get them off and not realize that there's still a bolt here. So make sure you get this one out in the corner. Now, as far as getting the bumper off, the first time you ever do it, it might help if you have a friend, so you don't suddenly drop one end of it and scratch it, but it's very light. And once you take the two big bolts out here, they always come right out. It's kind of, the bumper will be a little bit sandwiched in here, and so what I do, I'll take a pry bar and pry against here, being careful not to pry against anything that you're going to break, just to get it going and get it started out of there, so you don't just yank it out and it drops. Just get it out, and then as you get it out, there's these slots here on the side. The bumper has plastic feet, and so when you get back this far, there's the opening, So then you'll pop it out before you finish taking the bumper all the way off. Pop it out on both sides, and then you can just take it the rest of the way off. You can do it yourself if you're careful. Like I said, the first time you do it, if somebody's handy, you might want to have them at one end and you're at the other, just so you don't drop it and scratch the paint on the bumper. But that's it, no big deal. Let's look at the bumper here. There's the little feet that go in those slots on each side. So reverse putting them in, you kind of give those a bump with your hand, pop them in that slot. And you'll quickly know if you don't have them in when you slide the bumper forward to line these up. Then it'll be out, winged out a bit. You'll see it's loose. So then you'll just, it's no big deal. You just have to pull the bumper back out, get those lined up where they go into the slot, pop them in there, and then push everything forward and they'll ride in the slots. And you got to be careful too, because it is possible to get one of these in the slot and one not. Most of the time you get them both in if you're careful. Something just to be conscious of. You want to have them both in the slots before you slide it. There's your fog lights. I found it easiest, just they unplug easily right at the fog light. Here's your little clip, one on each side where your washer hose goes. And as you see, here's the slot where the shaft for the wiper arms comes out. And if you were to try and slide the bumper off, you're just going to scratch your paint and it's not going to come right off. So just like, as I mentioned, just take the wiper motors up and move them out of the way. I believe that's easier than you could take the nut off the shaft and take the wiper arm off, but then you're still sliding this out the shaft. So just take the two nuts off and set the wiper motors out of the way. Now here's what I'm talking about with this new power steering hose. See the top part, they appear to have put some type of cladding on it to protect it from rust. This is the part that's visible up on the engine. But now the lower part here came bare metal, and I was a little bit what started me thinking, it came in a large plastic bag with a Ziploc, and I just figured, well, that's to protect it from maybe any surface rust or from moisture in shipping. And then I got to thinking about that. I'm thinking, well, if I'm replacing a power steering line on a car because it rusted out, and they're putting it in a plastic bag to protect it from moisture, what about on a car? So what I did is the whole lower section you see here is I painted it. And that should give it some extra protection. As long as I'm doing it, might as well do it correctly. Now here you see the original equipment line from Saab that was on the car, and it appears that this was painted. The parts that don't have the heavy surface rust, you can still see the black paint on it. Now even the visible part that attaches to the pump up under the hood appears to have been painted too. But I'm going to leave that top part. It's easily accessible, and it appears that they did put some kind of cladding on it on the replacement line. Now here's the line installed. Now here's the key point, which I was mentioning earlier. It's through these, there's two of these, one here and one down at the other end, these holders for the power steering line. This is where the moisture tends to collect, and I've seen this many times where the rust will set up here, and this is where it'll leak. Now if you've got one of these older 9.3s and you've got power steering fluid, first maybe starting with just a very slight drip from the splash pans that are normally underneath here. Well, this is 9 out of 10 times this is where it's going to be coming from. Because of the rust, the line will have gotten thin. You'll start to seep at first, and then this being a pressure line, you'll get quite a leak. And changing this line is a bit of an ordeal. But so what I did here, because the surface rust had actually started to spread onto the member here itself, this is normally gray. I went ahead and ground the rust down. As long as I was doing this, I wanted to do it right. So I ground the rust down and gave it a coat of paint here. And then also when I was putting the line in, I mentioned earlier how I had painted the line. I sustained a few nicks on it, which is going to happen snaking this line in here. So I touched it up. And one other thing I did for extra insurance, since especially right here where it actually clamps around the line, the moisture is held and that's where it'll rust. I actually put some high temperature grease inside here. So this we should never have this problem again on this car. It's 2001. You know, 16, 17-year-old car. It took a while for it to rust out. And like I said, the line I took off wasn't actually leaking yet, but it had enough rust that I could justify changing it as long as I was in here. But this is your area right here. This is your problem area. Now one other thing I'd like to show you here is right in here is ways in there, if you can see that. That's where the line connects to another line which runs to the rack. And it's a rather awkward place to get at, but you can get at it a bit through here and then a bit from either side, and you have to put your wrenches at an angle. Now what I do whenever I do one of these, when you first see it, it'll be so rusty, this coupling here, that it will you know, make you wonder if you're going to get it apart. But I just, excuse my shaky camera, but if just put some WD-40 on it at the beginning of the job while you're doing the other stuff. And I've never had one that I couldn't get apart, and it's just an O-ring that's inside there. So I've found that they're not really that tight. They look much worse than they are. They do come apart. It's just a little awkward to work on. When you tighten it back up, you're going to have to put your wrench at an angle, but you can certainly get it snug enough doing that, because you may find you can't get a straight shot on the wrench there. So that's one of the awkward spots there. Now all of this here is behind your oil cooler, which is here. I've just got it set up out of the way, and so we'll be bolting the engine oil cooler back in place here in a little bit. One other thing with this line at the top, when you go to put it in, the line is clamped. There's a bolt in the back of the power steering pump, which you can probably see a little bit of there. It's a little awkward to get at. Just knowing that it's there and what it is 13 millimeter. You're going to need to come at it from the side with a universal 13, and don't take it out, just loosen it up enough. The bracket is slotted, and so just loosen it just enough to slide it out of there and slide it back in easily, and then tighten it back up. Another tip, tightening, anytime you tighten a line, the one on the top of course is easy, it's easy to get it lined up. you never want to try to thread the line when there's pressure on it at an angle. That's how you strip things out. And especially this one that we're talking about down here, you'll find that it's not going to line right up. It'll be kind of cocked, the angle will be funny. And also, I think even with the original equipment, not just at the aftermarket line, you know, they're not going to get all the bends just perfect. And then you're dealing with a line that's already has a bend that's fixed in place that you're connecting to, so the angles are going to be funny. So what you want to do, you want to make sure you get that lined up just perfectly straight on that O-ring before you try threading the threading the line together there, so you don't cross thread it. This is a little tip there. Once you get it all snugged up, then you can go ahead and finish lining things up, putting them in the brackets. You know, you don't want to secure it all in these brackets before you tighten that line up, but that's the last thing. You want to get your both ends of your line secured and tight, and then you can set it in the brackets here. Okay, getting ready to put things back together here. Now, there's a few things I wanted to show you before I put all this stuff back together and put the bumper back on. Now, this right here is the reasons why you have to take the bumper off and all this other stuff to get the radiator out, because the bottom of your radiator is the mount. This is the radiator right here. And same here, this screw for the AC condenser screws into the radiator, and as well as this lower one here, this is the engine oil cooler. It bolts there, both ends. Same with the condenser. So you've got these items that are mounted to the radiator. And in fact, the top of the condenser is just not screwed up here with those slots. So what you actually have to do, once you unbolt the condenser, leave it all in the car. You can leave it fully charged. That's not a problem. Just be careful with it. But once you unscrew the attachment points here for the condenser, you've got to actually slide it up a little. There's room to take it off the little slots here, and then your condenser will just sit there in the car while you take your radiator out from under the hood. It tilts forward, rearward, and then you take it out that way. So I wanted to show you that. Here's the culprit, and this is behind the engine oil cooler, and then you've got your intercooler as well. So, excuse the shaky camera, but if you like puzzles, you've got all these various shields and things that Saab has put in there from the factory. I mean, you could throw them out and you probably never notice the difference, but I figured Saab put them in there in the first place, and they had reasons for everything, so I put them back in. You have to take special note when you go to take them out, just where they were, because they can be a little tricky. For example, this one here with the hole in it, this is a hole for the intercooler, actually goes right through it. So you've got to get things in order to, you can't take it off while the intercooler's on there, so you've got to just be mindful of that. And so one other thing I'd like to point out, with the intercooler hoses, they have these clamps that are actually built right into the hose. You know, Saab, really heavy duty, nice stuff, but these clamps over time will rust here. So one of the first things you want to do when you're going to take things apart early on, as I mentioned earlier about spraying that line, same thing. Take some WD-40 or other nice penetrant and put it right in here where the worm screw is, and let it soak in there. You know, especially these lower ones, they may get some rust, and you want to save these. You know, you don't want to have to ruin the clamp. So spray them up nice before you try to. So if you try to force it, if it's rusty enough and you try to force it, you can ruin these clamps. You'd like to reuse them. And speaking of reusing things, there's the lower radiator hose over there. You know, I've found on this particular model, the V6 that they put in the 900s, which is another story I'll do a video on sometime. I just thought that was a bad marketing idea. But anyways, the some hoses on that, long hoses, they did tend to fail. But I have never seen these original. I'm confident. Here's a hose. Figure this: 16, 17-year-old hose, and I'm not going to replace it. I've never seen these fail ever. The Saab original equipment is just fantastic. Heavy-duty hoses, really good stuff. The one asterisk I would say on that, now if the engine has ever had a head gasket problem where you got oil intermixing in the coolant, now that's a whole different story, because that'll just destroy any hose, even these good Saab hoses. In that case, you're going to need to change the hoses. But these hoses are fine. Oh, and the other thing too with it, when you go to take them off, that's another way they could get damaged. You've got to use good sense to break the seal on these hoses after you've moved the clamp, on the water pumping on the radiator. You want to there's tools that are made specifically, and sometimes you don't have access, but there's ways to with patience to break the seal and take them off without prying or damaging the hose in any way. So just be careful when you take them apart and reuse them. I don't, like I say, I've never seen one fail. The heater hoses I have seen fail. They come as a pair. That's another story. I have seen those fail. But usually, even with those, there's been an issue with getting some oil in there. But these radiator hoses are good. So I just thought I wanted to show you a few of these things here before I started the reassembly and covered this up. Now I'll put all this back together before I finish up underneath, under the hood, and then I'll show you some things with that as I finish up with the radiator install on the other side. But the power steering line is all in there. It's all ready. It'd be nice if I could run the car and make sure it doesn't leak or anything. There's that one spot in here, the one place I'm a little leery, but you can still access it once the car is all back together. It's just a little harder to get at in that place. So if it happened that O-ring had got damaged putting it together, which isn't likely, I haven't had it happen, but if you want to check that and make sure you're not leaking any power steering fluid from that point there when you're done. But I'll have to wait till I've got things all buttoned up. Then I'll put the coolant in and the power steering fluid and run the car and make sure everything's good. Now here's what it looks like with all that stuff put back on the front end before the bumper goes on. All your little shields like this, down here, this one, there's one back here, over here, back here. So there's 6 of them. But like I said, they're there for a reason, so I wanted to put them all back. Now the one other thing, mentioning things with rust, you've got, this is where your intercooler bolts. There's a little black overspray paint on there, but that was actually a little rusty there, and so I'm about to put those bolts back in there. Now I'm not a big fan of never seize as far as using a whole lot of it, but I'll put a little bit of never seize on the tips of these bolts here for ease of removal next time. I used to work on post office Jeeps at times, and they believed in never seize. They put never seize on everything, and they must have had it by the 55-gallon drum. They put so much never seize on there that you couldn't work on the Jeep without getting never seize on yourself. That seems to be the way that stuff is. It's really easy to, you find it on your clothes and everything. So I'm not a big fan of putting up gobs of it on, but here and there, strategic spots for, such as with these intercooler bolts, I'll use it there. Okay, so once you've got the bumper off, and now it's easier to work, you can step right up to the car like I'm doing. Now you start taking things apart to get this radiator out of here. And to me is really the worst part of the job, because there's a lot of things that are in your way working here. For example, laying here, this is power steering return line, which goes under here and across and connects here. And that's right in the way, so one of the first things you've got to do, and that's kind of messy, got to unscrew it, you'll get a leak. I went ahead and capped it so I don't lose so much of that expensive hydraulic power steering fluid. And that's another thing, when you go to refill it, you want to use the right stuff. Let me just, as long as we're talking about it, here's a GM version of it. It says transmission oil, power steering oil. It's a hydraulic oil. The common name for it is Pennison. Anyways, you can look it up. It's a hydraulic oil. You don't want to use universal power steering fluid in these. Don't want to mix it. Very important. So anyways, back to accessing the radiator. Now to get the fan out of here, there's your fan, is you've also got to disconnect these are the transmission cooler lines. Here's the banjo bolts and the seals that you want to replace. I'll talk about those in another section of the video. So you want to get that out of the way. Now other things, disconnecting your upper radiator hose. Here's one of your turbo intercooler hoses. There's another one down here. It's hard to see down here, but I've started reassembly. I put it back on, but you're going to want to actually take that one right out of there. Take the lower hose off. The lower hose attaches to the water pump. You're not going to want to just disconnect it from the radiator though. Take it off the pump and just take it right out of there, because what you're going to find that you need every bit of room to get that radiator up and out of here and tilted out of here. There's just not a lot of room, and you're always fighting against things. For example, this, the AC, that's going to always be here to kind of fight with. The power steering return line goes under the battery there and attaches there, and there's not much you can do with it other than once you disconnect it, you have to kind of play with it and move it around, move it out of the way. You've also got your hose that goes to the top of the radiator from your coolant bottle. You can't take it off the radiator until you are able to tilt the radiator back and access the clamp. So those are some of the things in the way. Now, so you get all that stuff out of the way. Now, for me, I had the extra help of, it actually helped me to have this. When I went ahead and did my power steering line, here's the new line at the pump end. I went ahead and took that out too, because it actually gave me a little more room to play with the moving that radiator around too. Here's something to be careful with. Your power feed to your AC compressor is right down here, and it could be easy to damage it while you're... The reason, we haven't really talked about that yet, but the reason you've got to take all this front bumper and everything off to do the radiator is because the condenser, even though the radiator comes out here, you're not going to be able to get out because the radiator is attached to your AC condenser here. And another section of the video where I have all this off, I talk about it more extensively, so you can refer to that. But there's screws behind this intercooler that attach the condenser to the radiator. So even if you get everything else loose, you're not getting that radiator out of there. You don't want to start yanking on it. But anyways, once you've got your radiator detached from the condenser down here, it is going to come out reluctantly out of here. Now, what you'll do once you've got everything disconnected is, it's kind of hard to see it here. Let me grab a light. Right down here in that slotted receptacle there's a stud on the radiator with a rubber mount, and it slides right in there. And there's clips, one on each side, spring clips that go. There's spring clips on each side that hold it in there. Once you take the spring clips out, the radiator will tilt towards the engine, and then, because the radiator, other than being bolted to the condenser, is actually not bolted in the car. It just sits in these two rubber mounts on the top, and then the feet on the bottom. Here's the old radiator. There's a foot there and a foot there. And the bottom of it, plastic stud. It just goes in a rubber grommet that's on the cross member. But now this is part of your problem in getting out of there, because this foot here, which is on the left-hand side of the car, the driver's side on an American car, there's AC lines that are right above this, as well as the transmission cooler lines. And the trick is you've got to slide this far enough to the passenger side of the car to get this foot out from under those lines, because they don't really move much. And then you've got to really play with it to do that. And that's why on the other side of the car I mentioned taking the radiator, the lower radiator hose that attaches to the water pump, taking that right out, taking the intercooler turbo hose out of the way, all the way completely. You need all the room you can get to get this thing out of here, and then to put the new one in without damaging it as well. And so you need to take your time, because that can be the most frustrating part, is even though you've taken everything apart that you can take apart, you know, under here, because it's a tight squeeze, it's still not the easiest thing to get the radiator out of there. In fact, I'll show you something here. Some people don't want to damage their car, but this tab here, I bent that up a little bit, cracked the paint on it. But to me, this is one of the things you're always fighting with, because this is sticking out right into your radiator core. You go to put your new radiator in, you're going to want to hit against that. So the little bit of you gain by bending that up, you can bend it back when you're done. A little bit that you gain can mean a lot in getting the radiator out of there. Just a little trick that I learned on these. So that's basically it. The under the hood part for getting the radiator out of there. You're just going to have to take your time, be patient, and have a little bit of wrestle with it, because, as I said, you're going to be holding these various things out of the way in the best way you can at the same time that you're getting the radiator out from that foot. Would be you can see it. Let me get a light. There's the foot on the radiator, just past the drain plug there, but it's got to come past this AC line, and it just really wants to fight with that, getting it out of there.
Again, not a lot of room.
So you just have to take your time, get it out and get the new one in there without damaging anything. Let's talk about the fan for a minute. It's just held in by a screw on each side, and then it's got feet, one on each side, that the slots on the radiator, lower slot there, and then that little stud sticking out there where your screw will go for the fan on each side. It's not a big deal detaching it in a couple electrical connectors. A tip on those, there's sliders on them when they get older on the Saab. When you go to slide them, you can crack them and break the lock. But if you just spray a little WD-40 on the lock and let it soak in there, and then carefully pry them, then you'll never break any of them. The plastic can be a little old and brittle, and it can be kind of stuck. So just a little tip there to unplug any of these connectors. There's a lot of them on a Saab with the lock, so you don't break your lock. But that really the hardest thing with the fan, again, just like the radiator, there's not a lot of room to get it out of here. And so after you move this stuff out of the way, you're going to have to tilt it a little bit back and forth and that to get it up out of there. These are the two spring clips that hold the radiator in. They clip over the rubber mounts on the top of the radiator. These were pretty crusty, so I put some rust converter on them and gave them a coat of Rust-Oleum. Extend the life of them. Still have good. They have tension, spring tension. So, and I don't really know how available these are. It's not the kind of thing that might be easy to find, except on another car in a junkyard or something. So that's the clips. Just a little tip, getting these clips back in there. Just bend these feet back out again, and put the one part in the slot, and then take a screwdriver and push against the other part to snap it in there. Because there's a little resistance in those rubber mounts. You might find that you can't squeeze it and get it in there by hand, but you may have to take a screwdriver and push against the top till you got to make sure this snaps. There's little slots. Make sure these are both snapped in. It's easy to get one in and the other one's not quite snapped in yet, but to get it holding the mount securely, you want it to snap in both ends, both slots. I'd like to talk about these seals for a minute. First of all, let's talk about the O-ring. For whatever reason, the power steering line that I put on, it comes with the seal on the one end, or the O-ring on the one end by the power steering pump, but they never include you really need this other one at the other end of the line. They never include that other one because I guess theoretically it's supposed to come on the other line, but you're not changing the other line. In fact, I've never seen that other line fail. But anyways, you need to be conscious of that. Don't try to reuse the old O-ring, but you definitely want to order one of these up when you order up your power steering line. As I said, they only give you the one O-ring. I happen to have a few of these in my toolbox, so I didn't have to order one. And you see what kind of condition. This is the one I took out of the line. It's swollen and mashed. But even if it looks decent, you don't want to risk reusing it. It's just not worth it. Now these 4 seals here are for the transmission cooler lines where they attach to the radiator. There's banjo bolts, and these seals work real nice. They've got rubber on the inside here, and again, this is something you don't want to reuse these. They do tend to seep if this rubber dries out and gets hard. It's just not worth it. Replace these definitely, so order these up. And what you see here, these larger seals are the same thing you use on the one end of the fuel filter. So this set here is what you would need for the fuel filter. So I ordered these up too at the same time. So I'll have these when I go to change my fuel filter. The one banjo bolt on the fuel filter has the large seals, the same size as the tranny cooler lines. And then the other end of the fuel filter has these smaller ones. So you need to get 2 of the smaller ones when you do your fuel filter. Looking around online, what I ran into was some outrageous prices for these on eBay. And if they had a reasonable price for them, they had outrageous shipping, like $11 for shipping for something that doesn't weigh anything that you could put in an envelope. So ultimately on Euro Parts, which is a good source of Saab parts, I found these for 74 cents a piece. But again, there's a minimum shipping, free shipping. I think you've got to spend something like at least $50. I forget offhand, but so anyways, I needed some other parts. So what I did is, when I ordered these at 74 cents a piece, and not to have to pay shipping, to have free shipping, I ordered some other Saab parts to get me up to the free shipping level, and then I got these seals here. But very important, you don't want to risk reusing these. It's just not worth it. And then talk about the fuel filter for just a minute, even though it's not really the topic of this video, and I may cover it again at another time when I change a fuel pump and a fuel filter. Sometimes some filters might come with just the copper seals, and my experience is that those are very, very risky. That sometimes you just got to tighten them, and they still want to have small leaks. Whereas these seals that come on the original equipment Saab, these are just fantastic. You put new seals of these on, you don't even have to make it that tight. Just snug it up, and you'll never get a leak. Never. These are excellent seals. Don't use the copper seals on the fuel filters, but go with these Saab original equipment style seals. Just a few tips before I put the front bumper back on, and the headlights, side marker lights, and grille. After putting the radiator and the power steering hose, I like to fill all my fluids and run the car, and then check everything, make sure there's no leaks or anything before I button things all the way back up. It's a little easier because if you do have some problems, it's a lot easier to rectify before you put the car all back together. For example, just to review, you're going to want to check your power steering line, in particular right up there, that coupling there. Make sure that's not leaking, because that could be a little tricky there with that O-ring in there. And then get your power steering clamped up at your pump on your return line. Your radiator hoses, such as your upper hose here, it can seep there. In fact, the new style radiators, for whatever reason, they don't have a full ridge all the way around the top there. And there's a little molding line where they form it, and you can actually get some seepage out of there with the old squeeze clamps. So a lot of times I like to replace it with the screw clamp. You can get a little more tension on there, and Make sure you don't have any seepage. So it's good to warm the car up and then check everything again before you put it all back together. Just one last thing to take note of: your on your intercooler for your turbo, those big hoses that go to it. You want to make extra sure that you've really snugged those hose clamps up on those nicely, because they can pop off of there. You could have had it happen. You can step on the gas, and then all of a sudden the car will stall out when the turbo hose pops right off the intercooler. And so you really want to make sure you didn't forget to snug those up. So that's just a few last little checks. Make sure everything's okay before you button it up. So I hope that these tips have been of help. It's a big job to do, to change the radiator and the power steering line on one of these. Maybe a little more than a Saturday project. Once you get involved, it can take some time, but it's better just to take your time and do a nice job with it. So now that you've run the car and make sure everything is secure, now you can button things up, put everything back together, and feel good about the job that you've done, and you won't have any lingering issues.